Good morning. The Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. The Chair notes the presence of our colleague, Congressman Bobby Scott from Virginia. We appreciate his interest in this topic and welcome your participation today, sir. I ask unanimous consent that Congressman Scott be allowed to fully participate in today's hearing. Without objection, it will be so ordered. I would also like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record statements from the following organizations: the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, the National College Access Network, the American Council on Education, and EPIC. Today we are here to talk about a data breach involving a Department of Education website and an IRS web-based application. Every day, literally, adversaries and criminals conduct an unknown number of sophisticated and devastating cyber attacks against our nation. To get the government ahead of the curve will require even more effort on the part of agency heads and chief information officers as we begin the task of modernizing old, outdated, and insecure federal technologies and network architectures. But we cannot calibrate our defenses and buy the right security platforms unless we understand the threat. We must be honest and transparent about what risks that we face and what damage is being done. Ignoring the problem or underestimating the threat places our nation and its citizens in danger. Once again, we find ourselves in the Oversight Committee investigating a data breach. Hackers were trying to file fraudulent tax returns and steal refunds. To accomplish this crime, they turned to the Department of Education's FAFSA, or Free Application for Federal Student Aid.gov network, and the data retrieval tool, which was designed to try to aid in financial applications. To get the one piece of information that they desired that they couldn't buy in the marketplace, they came to the tool, specifically taxpayers' adjusted gross income data. You need that AGI to authenticate your identity for the IRS and file your tax returns. So all hackers needed to do was go to the dark web, buy a cache of American taxpayer personally identifiable information, use that to get into the FAFSA.gov and the data retrieval tool, and then they had everything that they needed to steal tax-paying citizens' refunds. This is exactly the kind of hacking scheme that the federal agencies must be aware of when they make their services available online. If sensitive data can be accessed through an online application, it must be secured with strong authentication measures and appropriately encrypted. We need to call these events what they are: data breaches and major incidents. Facing the truth is important not only because the incidents ultimately affect tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of American taxpayers and probably millions of students applying for student aid, but it also because without understanding the threats we face, we can't protect ourselves. It took the Internal Revenue Service almost 3 months to determine that this was a major data breach incident that required congressional notification per FSMA requirements. And the department is still not calling this a major incident, and I would like to find out, and I'm sure my colleagues, why. This is not about wordsmithing. What we call these incidents helps us bring the full weight of the federal government to bear on the cyber response, getting help to those that have been impacted and making sure the vulnerabilities are defended. Cybersecurity is a team sport. A leak at one end of the pipe or the other still creates a leak. Agencies must safeguard their data and make sure it goes where they intend. If we have other organizations' tools or technologies hooked up to our networks or websites, then we are responsible. It only takes one vulnerability, and then everyone who is connected to that vulnerability is at risk. What is so troubling about this incident is that it was detected through suspicious activity accidentally. The hackers inadvertently targeted an IRS employee. Criminals do make dumb mistakes, but so do agencies. I'd like to think our detection and defense abilities are more advanced than mistakes of criminals, relying on the dumb mistakes that they make. We aren't going to win this fight unless we understand the threats that we face, the damage that hackers and enemies are doing to us, and what we as a Congress can do to empower agency heads and CIOs to protect our networks. The first step in fighting back is wearing our mistakes like a badge. We should follow it with some grit and determination to not let it happen to the areas of government that have been entrusted to our charge. And with that, I would like to yield to the ranking member, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. No matter who may define it, this is a major incident. IRS or education, I'm just letting you know it's a major incident. You can put any kind of definition you want on it, but I'm telling you it is. I welcome this hearing today. This hearing is about data retrieval, the data retrieval tool, and that is a valid topic that several other committees are also addressing. And I, too, Mr. Chairman, want to thank Representative Scott for joining us today. He is one who has addressed these issues for many, many years, and I thank him. Now, what nobody seems to be addressing is the unethical, abusive, and predatory actions of student loan companies. Last September, the Inspector General issued a report finding that multiple student loan companies, which were supposed to be helping students, were actually accessing and changing student log-on information as part of predatory schemes to access their accounts, change their regular mail and email addresses, and even intercept correspondence. That's a major, major event. Specifically, the IG reported that the process for logging on to the federal student aid website was, quote, being misused by commercial third parties to take over borrowers' accounts, end of quote. In one case, the IG warned that a student loan company, and I quote, changed the mailing address, the phone number, and email address for borrowers so that it would be difficult for the borrowers to be contacted by loan servicers, end of quote. In another case, the IG found that a company charged borrowers monthly fees to, quote, put their loans into forbearance with the stated promise of eventually enrolling them in the public service loan forgiveness or some other debt reduction program, even though the borrowers, in some cases, were not qualified for these programs, end of quote. This is major. The IG also found that these companies were able to, quote, intercept all of the borrowers' emails, correspondence, including password resets via email, important email notices, and direct communication from FSA or the loan servicer, end of quote. Less than 2 weeks ago, on April 20th, our committee staff conducted a transcribed interview with the special agent in charge of this investigation at the Inspector General's office. This is what he told us. He warned that these companies, and I quote, were controlling thousands of accounts or creating thousands of accounts and controlling them, end of quote. In other words, the very companies that were supposed to be helping students were actually abusing their trust. These practices are reprehensible, but the IG reported that it could not prosecute these student loan companies because of technicalities. Apparently, these companies force students to sign powers of attorney to get loans, so the companies presumably could try to argue that they were authorized to engage in these abusive activities. Something is awfully wrong with that picture. It is outrageous that these companies effectively got away with behavior they must have known was wrong. No, not must have known, they knew was wrong. I'm eager to hear from today's witnesses about improvements necessary to hold these student loan companies accountable for engaging in these deceptive and abusive practices. In addition, as we will hear today, criminals were able to compromise the data retrieval tool, which is used to link student tax information to financial aid and student loan accounts online. These criminals then use this information to file fraudulent tax returns. It is unacceptable that students have to deal with the abusive practices of predatory loan companies, as well as the increased threats of identity theft. It is critical that we crack down on these criminal elements and improve the security of these systems. Congress also needs to support these efforts. Severe budget cuts in recent years have made it more difficult to make critical improvements in information technology. President Trump's budget proposal and staff reduction directives would exacerbate these challenges. Finally, if we really want to protect students from the abuses we are addressing here today, Congress obviously cannot abolish the Department of Education, as some of my colleagues have proposed. We must support and increase our nation's investments in our students. As I often say, our children are the living messages we send to a future we will never see. The question is, how will we send them? The question is, how will we protect them? And this is that moment. This is our watch. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. I will hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any members who would like to submit a written statement. We will now recognize our panel of witnesses. I'm pleased to welcome Mr. James Runcie, the Chief Operating Officer, Office of the Federal Student Aid, Department of Education. Mr. Jason Gray, Chief Information Officer from the Department of Education. Ms. Sylvana Gina Garza, Chief Information Officer of the Internal Revenue Service. The Honorable Kenneth Corbin, Commissioner, Wage Investment Division of the Internal Revenue Service, and Mr. Timothy Camus, the Deputy Inspector General for Investigations, Treasury Inspector General for the Tax Administration. We welcome all of you and thank you for being here this morning. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please be seated. Let the record reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. In order to allow time for discussion, we would appreciate it if you would please limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes each. Your entire written statement will be made a part of the record. And with that, I'm pleased to recognize Mr. Runcie for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Russell, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee for the opportunity to join you today. I will discuss the events that led to the data retrieval tool, or DRT, being disabled, the plan to securely restore the tool, and the actions we've taken to assist students, parents, borrowers, and schools. As the largest source of federal student aid for post-secondary education in the U.S., FSA delivered more than $125 billion in aid to over 13 million students attending more than 6,000 schools last year. FSA is committed to safeguarding taxpayer interests as we provide access to federal student aid for students and their families. During my tenure at FSA, we have securely managed the growth of the direct loan portion of the student loan portfolio from 9.2 million recipients and $155 billion to 32 million recipients and approximately $1 trillion. One of the critical resources that has assisted the department in this growth is the DRT. It first became available in 2010 through the joint efforts of the IRS and FSA, and provides FSA's customers an effective way to transfer required IRS tax information. Each year, about half of the 20 million FAFSA filers use the DRT, and another 4.5 million borrowers use the tool for the income-driven or IDR plans. In total, over 55 million FAFSA and IDR applications have successfully utilized the DRT since inception. Using the DRT has saved millions of hours of applicants' time, reduced improper payments by billions of dollars, and lowered the verification hurdle for schools and their dedicated staff of financial aid professionals. Following a broader IRS security review last year, the agency contacted FSA about a potential DRT vulnerability. The joint goal of the IRS and FSA was to minimize the potential vulnerability without causing a major disruption to our customers. We agreed to keep the DRT operational while increasing the monitoring of the tool for suspicious activity. The IRS and FSA have evaluated many solutions that could be integrated with both applications and would increase the protection of taxpayer information. Many solutions did not meet the required security and privacy threshold or resulted in too many applicants being unable to access federal student aid. In February, we agreed to develop and implement an encryption solution. This solution would be employed for the 2018-19 award year beginning October 1st, 2017. The IRS and FSA also agreed that we would continue to monitor the applications for the current award years and still allow for DRT use. On March 3rd, the IRS alerted FSA of suspicious activity related to the DRT and suspended its use. The suspicious activity involved bad actors who illegally obtained personal information elsewhere and began filling out FAFSAs in order to access taxpayer information from the IRS through the DRT. This information could then be used to file fraudulent tax returns. I want to reiterate that we have no evidence that any personal information from the department's systems were accessed. However, with evidence that criminals were starting to exploit the potential vulnerability of the DRT, using the tool was no longer an option. The solution to bring back the DRT allows tax information to be electronically transferred, but it will encrypt the information and hide it from the applicant's view. For the IDR application, we are targeting the end of May to have the DRT functionality available to applicants. For the FAFSA, we are scheduled to meet the October 1st timing for the 18-19 award year launch. Due to benefit and risk considerations, the current award year of 17-18 will not have the DRT available for the remainder of the award year. Consequently, we're reminding students, parents, and borrowers that they can still apply for aid and repayment plans without the DRT. Our ongoing efforts involve utilizing all of our communications resources, digital properties, and vendors, and also leveraging the financial aid community. The department also issued a communication to schools extending flexibilities regarding verification procedures. I appreciate the opportunity to provide you with this information, and I welcome any questions you may have here today. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Gray for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Russell and Ranking Member Cummings and members of the committee. I am Jason Gray, CIO for the U.S. Department of Education, a position I have had the privilege of holding since June of 2016. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today on the cybersecurity incident that led to the shutdown of the IRS data retrieval tool. As a CIO, I embrace and support the department's mission of promoting student achievement and preparation for global competitiveness, fostering educational excellence, and ensuring equal access by ensuring that we apply information technology effectively, efficiently, and securely. I take this responsibility seriously and understand that this includes the entire department, including federal student aid and all principal and support offices. When we became aware that the IRS had confirmed that tax data accessed through the FAFSA link to the DRT may have been used to fraudulently file tax returns, we immediately activated our incident response processes. This involved coordination of Security Operations Center resources to gather forensic data and to gain a better understanding of the incident. We held daily meetings to facilitate communication between the technical staff of my office, Federal Student Aid, and the IRS. Additionally, we reported the incident to our Office of the Inspector General and to the United States Computer Emergency Readiness Team at Homeland Security. While the department's systems were involved, this was in essence a scheme directed at retrieving tax data from the IRS. There is no evidence that the malicious actors were able to access any personal information from the department's systems. I am confident that the personal information the department has on borrowers, students, and parents remains appropriately protected. I will describe several actions we have taken to further strengthen and enhance our cybersecurity program to protect sensitive data, including PII, that is managed by the department. Incident response is a priority for the department. In 2015, we created an incident response planning work group to address cybersecurity incidents and data breach response processes. In 2016, the department conducted 2 incident response tabletop exercises that helped us refine our incident response process through the development of lessons learned and identification of actions the department needed to enhance our overall incident response process. The department has implemented a number of technical controls and solutions to detect policy violations, unauthorized changes, and unauthorized access to the department's primary network. These include a data loss prevention solution, which restricts users from sending emails that contain sensitive PII, such as Social Security numbers, outside of the department. In 2016, the department also implemented network access control, which prevents connection by any unauthorized device to the network. A third solution, web application firewalls, has been implemented, and we are transitioning web portals and web applications to be protected by those firewalls. The department has partnered with DHS on the implementation of automated solutions for continuous diagnostics and mitigation, which will enable us to continuously monitor our network for intrusions and malicious activity. The department also actively leverages multiple DHS-provided shared security services. I thank you for the opportunity to discuss the cybersecurity incident that affected the DRT. The Department of Education and the IRS continue working together to continuously enhance the security and privacy protections around this important capability. I am confident that the technical solution currently being worked will achieve this goal. I would be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Garza for 5 minutes.
Chairman Russell, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the cybersecurity incident associated with the Federal Student Aid Data Retrieval Tool, or DRT. I have been a public servant for over 32 years, and I am information technology executive for the last 17. Recently, I became the Chief Information Officer, having served as the Deputy CIO for the 4 years prior. During this time, I have seen a dramatic change in the number and types of attacks fraudsters and criminal enterprises use to try to get the data we are committed to protecting. As the tactics have changed, the IRS's attitude and approach towards cybersecurity and refund fraud have also changed. We understand that the enemy is ever-changing and that we must stay diligent in continually assessing our risk posture and improving our defenses. We know that we all share the responsibility to ensure that cybersecurity is embedded in every part of our operation. Stepping into the role of CIO 8 months ago, I established 2 priorities: cybersecurity and delivering a successful filing season. Having been an executive in the Business Operating Division, I appreciate the delicate balance between meeting taxpayer needs with quick and convenient access to online programs and securing our systems. We did not take lightly the decision to disable the DRT tool. We knew that doing so had the potential to disrupt millions of students applying for federal financial aid. Even so, I believe we made a sound decision, one which would protect the data of approximately 175 million Americans. This is our highest priority. I appreciate your decision to conduct a public hearing on this subject, as I believe it is critical that we continue to raise awareness of the widespread cyber and identity theft threats we are facing across the globe today. Every day, thousands of individuals fall victim to identity theft. Government and private sector companies are all being bombarded with cyber attacks. We in the IRS have a front row seat. Every day, the IRS receives and defends, on average, 1 million attempts to penetrate our systems. Identity theft continues to be a major threat to our tax administration efforts. When we first became concerned with the level of authentication protecting the data retrieval tool, we assessed the risk to determine if we should shut down the application. Our practice has been to shut down the application of concern until we have mitigated the risk. In prior situations, no other agency was involved. This situation was different. The Department of Education was highly dependent on the data retrieval tool for the success of its program and to serve its customers. We would not make a decision to shut down the application without engaging the Department of Education in the decision process. We discussed the need to raise the level of authentication with the Department of Education. Additionally, we discussed the fact that this could be done at either the Department of Education website or at the point the applicant invokes the DRT tool. The Department of Education needed to have a user-friendly solution in place. This made it undesirable to implement a solution that would cost about 70% of applicants to be unable to complete the process. We continued to collaborate with the Department of Ed to find an alternative solution to protect the data. At that time, there was no evidence of data loss or fraud, so we agreed to not shut down the application while we worked on an acceptable solution. We were always clear that the moment we had evidence of data loss or fraud, we would turn off the data retrieval tool. On March 3rd, having confirmed an incident of fraud, we turned off the application. Details of the incident and activities leading up to the decision to shut down the application are in the written testimony. In conclusion, protecting data is our highest priority. This threat is persistent and ever-changing, and the IRS remains diligent and ever watchful. The portion of the funds Congress provided last year to support cybersecurity has helped us implement tools and processes that have enhanced our capabilities, but there will always be more work to be done. Chairman Russell, Ranking Member Cummings, members of the committee, this concludes my oral testimony. I would be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Corbin for 5 minutes.
Chairman Russell, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of this committee. I am the new commissioner of the IRS's Wage and Investment Division, having started this position at the beginning of the year. My responsibilities include overseeing the processing of tax returns, issuance of refunds, preventing and detecting refund fraud, providing the best possible taxpayer service. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. My colleague, Ms. Garza, has described the work the IRS is doing in collaboration with the Department of Education to secure the DRT. I will put that in a broader context of how we are working to safeguard all of our programs where we share taxpayer information. I will also update the committee on our efforts to help taxpayers who may have been affected by the incident earlier this year involving the DRT. An important focus of the IRS's efforts to protect taxpayer data is the ongoing battle against stolen identity refund fraud. We've made steady progress over the last few years against this threat, but as many colleagues noted, this threat is constantly evolving. To address this challenge, the IRS has worked to increase our ability to monitor, detect, analyze suspicious activity within our systems. Congress helped us by approving $290 million in additional funding in 2016, which included $95 million to improve cybersecurity. We have used a portion of that funding for monitoring equipment and other capabilities that are more sophisticated than we previously had. This is helping us detect unusual activity in our various online tools and applications more quickly. Despite all this progress we've made, we realize we cannot relax the fight against identity theft. We are finding that as the IRS enhances return processing filters, catches more fraudulent returns at the time of filing, criminals attempt to become more sophisticated at mimicking taxpayers' identities so they can evade those filters and successfully obtain fraudulent refunds. Therefore, the IRS is working not just to react better and faster, but also to stay ahead of the criminals. In that regard, we've also undertaken a broad effort to review authentication practices for programs where we share taxpayer information and strengthen those practices where necessary. Student aid is an area where we have been concerned about the ability of bad actors to fraudulently obtain taxpayer information. That led us, beginning last fall, to more closely monitor activity on the DRT and work with the Department of Education to make the DRT more secure. In investigating the incident earlier this year involving the DRT, we found that the data obtained through unauthorized use of the tool was in some cases used to attempt to file false returns. Our strengthened fraud filters have stopped a significant number of questionable tax returns by filers who access the DRT. We are working to determine whether any of those returns are in fact fraudulent. Our analysis of the suspicious activity involving the DRT found approximately 100,000 individuals may have had their taxpayer information compromised. While we have indications that a large number of these taxpayers are in all likelihood did not have any information compromised, in an abundance of caution, we have mailed letters to all of these taxpayers. We wanted to tell them about the possibility of unauthorized activity related to their personal information so they can take steps to secure their data. We also offered them free credit monitoring. Along with notifying these taxpayers, the IRS is marking their accounts to provide additional protection against the possibility that an identity thief could file a false return using their information. We also recognize that many families trying to apply for student aid have been inconvenienced by a decision to shut off the DRT while we work to improve security for the tool. In the interim, families can still complete the application for student financial aid by manually providing the requested financial information from copies of their return. Although we realize this is not as convenient as using the DRT, we have a responsibility to ensure the DRT and all of our online tools are fully protected from identity thieves. Chairman Russell, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of this committee, that concludes my statement. I will be happy to take your questions.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Camus for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Russell, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the topic of the recent free application for federal student aid data retrieval tool breach. On average, each year, the IRS issues approximately $400 billion in refunds, processes 242 million tax returns, and collects over $3 trillion in revenue. In addition to the significant amount of money that flows through the IRS each year, the taxpayer's IRS information is extremely valuable to identity thieves. As a result, the IRS has become a persistent target of cyber criminals located all over the world. Over the past several years, TIGTA has conducted numerous investigations of a variety of cyber attacks on the IRS. For example, in May 2015, criminals launched a coordinated attack on the IRS e-authentication portal that was estimated to impact 110,000 taxpayers. Further investigation revealed that more than 700,000 taxpayers were impacted by abuses of the system by multiple bad actors over an extended period of time. In January 2016, the IRS e-file PIN application was exploited. The IRS estimates the exploitation resulted in the issuance of over 100,000 e-file PINs that were used to file fraudulent tax returns seeking more than $100 million in fraudulent refunds. On January 25, 2017, the IRS noticed unusual activity on the FAFSA data retrieval tool. The IRS reported this observation to the Department of Education. The Department of Education advised the IRS that they believed the activity was legitimate activity. Then, on February 27, 2017, it was determined that the FAFSA data retrieval tool was, in fact, being used in order to steal taxpayers' adjusted gross income, or AGI, information. Taxpayer AGI information is extremely valuable to identity thieves as it is needed by criminals in order to authenticate themselves for the purpose of filing fraudulent tax returns and stealing refunds. Due to this activity, in early March 2017, the IRS made the decision to take the data retrieval tool offline. It is estimated at this time that as many as 100,000 taxpayers may have had their AGI information stolen through this exploitation. Through the benefit of hindsight, all of these cyber-related incidents that I have discussed reveal that although the IRS conducts electronic risk assessments of its tax information sharing sites, it has had difficulty in identifying proper levels of risk associated with the various applications. That is because the struggle with determining the risk, then necessary authentication requirements, all the while balancing the ease of use for taxpayers, continues to be the challenge. As we learn from our investigations how cyber criminals are defeating the various authentication and security requirements, we share what we learn with the IRS in order to help them shore up their applications. One thing is crystal clear. There is a determined criminal element paying close attention to electronic tax administration, and I believe these criminals will continue to present challenges to the future of efficient and secure electronic tax administration. In summary, we at TIGTA take seriously our mandate to protect American taxpayers and the integrity of the IRS. As such, we plan to provide continuing investigative and audit coverage in the area of cybersecurity, and we look forward to continued discussions on ways we can fight these types of cyber crimes in the future. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to share our views, and I look forward to answering questions.
Thank you. The chair will now recognize himself for 5 minutes. Ms. Garza, as I look at this situation, and you certainly have a lot of experience both in the CIO arena as well as in public service, and we do appreciate that. A lot of times public servants are taken for granted, but with your broad experience, that's not taken lightly. But still, as we examine this issue, we're trying to get to who is responsible for making the operational and security decisions for the data retrieval tool.
Sir, as I said in my opening testimony, we're all responsible for ensuring that cybersecurity is our top priority. As a group, we look at every risk assessment, we evaluate the situation, and we make the decisions as to what level of risk we're willing to take with the application that we are talking about. Over the last year since Get Transcript, we've become much more conservative, but we evaluate the situation, we discuss it, and we determine what actions we need to take.
Now, in your testimony, you'd mentioned that this was unique because unlike attempts or attacks on the IRS and the different departments within the IRS, this involved a different department. So you had one end of the pipe and the other end of the pipe. So when you learned in September 2016 that it was possible to, with, quote, little stolen personal information, end quote, for a hacker to pose as a student and access the DRT tool and the data stored on that tool, why did you not move to immediately secure the tool through encrypting or otherwise masking the sensitive information accessible through the DRT?
So there was a couple of actions that we took at that time. First of all, there was no data loss at the time. We had no evidence of fraud at the time. We immediately...
Well, there was no evidence of fraud, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't. I mean, you had a clear indication that something was awry. Yes or no?
We looked at the analytics, and we looked at all of the data that we had available to us at the time, and we did not see anything suspicious. We contacted the Department of Education. Both cyber organizations started to work to look at the data, and the data did not reveal that there was any kind of penetration going on at that time.
But, well, and I guess, and here's the information that I'm speaking at specifically, the isolated case, did it not result in an indictment that is still processing in the courts from September 13th?
It was a single case, and they did not get the data.
Well, I guess then let me follow on this vein, because what I hear each of the panel saying is that no data breach, no problem. And then I hear Mr. Camus say 100,000 investigation ongoing and fraudulent returns filed, and I'll come back to some of that. But Mr. Gray, to what extent do you think that the department is responsible for securing the data accessible on FAFSA.gov and other web-based applications?
100% we're responsible for securing our data.
Okay, but yet we see the Department of Ed saying, hey, give us a tool. We have the IRS saying, here's your tool. And you've got data coming out the spigot on one end. You think it's secure on the other. There's a leak. And yet it took you how many months from September to February to even recognize and say, no, we thought it was legitimate in September, but now we think we might have a problem. That is a big period of breach. So would you say that you have a responsibility for, you do have that responsibility, but that wasn't perceived as such in September?
It was perceived that there was a potential vulnerability in September, October, and the two departments worked together to create a solution that would prevent that vulnerability from being exploited. It did, when it became an exploited vulnerability, which was in March, is when we took the appropriate action to bring it offline.
And yet it wasn't shut down when you had indication in the start of a new financial aid season. And I guess what I'd like to do is, you know, Mr. Runcie, you said that there was no evidence that info was accessed, but were fraudulent returns filed with regard to this data?
Mr. Chairman, I can't tell you if fraudulent returns were filed or not. What I can tell you, because we're not privy to that information, what we did was we analyzed the Social Security numbers, IP addresses. We did a pretty exhaustive examination looking at indicators of risk, and we returned that information to the IRS so that they could complete some of their analysis. In September, as I mentioned earlier in my oral comments, we, at that point, probably had filed 50 million applications using the DRT. So we filed a substantial amount of applications using the DRT going back 7 years to 2010. It is an evolving landscape, and it's quite possible, as we've said, that the criminals and the fraudulent activity, you know, they're innovative, and so things change. But over that period of time, there wasn't any documented material criminal activity on the DRT. When that was found and confirmed, it was shut down. So there's a history there that, one, we relied on, even though we continued to monitor it, and then we balanced that against the risk of shutting off the tool and all the implications around shutting those tools.
Well, there's always a risk of protecting taxpayers, and I want to be respectful of the time here, but before I turn it over to the ranking member, you know, what it appears is that we're not identifying that we had a breach, and it's made us more vulnerable. And with that, we'll come back to some of that at a later time. I'd like to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Runcie, this past September, the Inspector General issued a scathing report warning that student loan companies were using the federal aid website to take advantage of students. The IG explained the tactics these companies were using to commit possible fraud. First, the loan companies would obtain the log-on credentials students use to access their accounts. Then the loan companies would change or create new credentials to let them take control of the student accounts. These loan companies took advantage of these students for commercial gain and in many different ways. Now, Mr. Runcie, are you aware of that report?
Yes, I am.
And in one case, the IG reported that a loan consolidation company, and I quote, changed the mailing address, phone number, and email address for borrowers so that it would be difficult for borrowers to be contacted by their own loan servicers. Another company charged students $60 a monthly service fee to, and I quote, put their loans into forbearance with the stated promise of eventually enrolling them in a public service loan forgiveness or some other debt reduction program, even though the borrowers in some cases were not qualified for these programs. And Mr. Runcie, when you read this report, were you troubled by these companies that did this to these students?
Ranking Member Cummings, yes, I think we were all troubled. And we continue to work with the IG. We have a potential solution or mitigating action that we're going to take later this month. So we understand what the issue is. But as you mentioned earlier, there is the technicality of someone who potentially signs up for these services. So whether it's through a power of attorney or some other agreement, there is sort of that technical issue that we have to deal with.
So the IG reported that it could not prosecute these loan companies based on technicalities. For example, many of these companies required students to sign those powers of attorney in order to get the loans. The companies then use these powers of attorney to improperly access the student accounts. Now, Mr. Runcie, it should not be necessary for students to sign powers of attorney to get student loans. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I absolutely agree. And I think one of the approaches that we've taken is to go heavy on user education. I mean, ultimately, all these services that are being provided can be done free. But again, through aggressive marketing tactics and so forth, it's quite possible that there are a number of people who are not aware that they can get these services done free. So we've been real focused on user education. And in addition, you know, we're going to make sure that there's information out there that the IG can leverage in terms of going after some of the bad actors that are out there. And that's what I referenced to a little bit earlier without actually being specific.
I got you. Now, what other actions have been taken so that going forward, these student loan companies will be held accountable for these abusive activities? This thing, is something about this that just tears at my heart, because I see so many. I sit on the board of a college, and I see young people having to drop out of school because they don't have money, and they're struggling. They just want to go out there and be all that God meant for them to be. And not only do they have to fight people who are supposed to be helping them, but then they lose the opportunity, and they don't lose it maybe for a week or a day. They lose it for a lifetime. That's why I'm so concerned about this. Now, what assistance can Congress provide to help hold student loan companies more accountable? I mean, what can we do? Do you need some help?
Yeah, I mean, you know, well, I have some thoughts.
Give us your thoughts, because we have a duty. Once we find out that there are things that we can do, we need to explore and try to figure out whether they're practical to be done.
Well,
but we got to know what they are.
Yeah, I mean, so there is that technicality. I don't know if there's a way to sort of limit the ability to transfer the authority of giving away your password and your information so that others can provide those services. If there is some, you know, legislative process to address that, then, you know, I would be an advocate of it. I think the other thing, though, is you got to balance that potentially with, there may be a population, and I know it would be a segment, a small segment of the people that are being contacted, who may actually need some guidance for some act, whether it's loan consolidation or providing some other, you know, value within the federal student aid system. There may be some small amount, and we would have to sort of think about the impact on those that might need some level of assistance. But again, I think the bigger problem is what you indicated. There is the potential for people to be put in a situation where they're harmed for a very long period of time because they're not educated about some of the options out there to do it by themselves.
So would you think a legislation regarding the doing away with the power of attorney requirement would be appropriate?
I think it would be something that we should consider. You know, again, we'd have to do some analysis, you know, and it could be surveys or whatever. There are, like I said, there's potentially a group of some of the most needy who may need some assistance, and I can't calibrate that right now. But I think, as you said, the bigger problem is that there's a lot of them that aren't aware that they don't need to pay for these services and are being exploited.
Mr. Chairman, I would hope that we would pursue this even further. I think it would be legislative malpractice for us not to protect these students. It is ridiculous that we've got to do all that we can. I'm sure that you will work with us, and everybody up there on our panel will work with us to try to make sure that happens. The other thing that we've got to do, Mr. Chairman, we can't have just a hearing with these folks. We got to bring in these people that are messing over our young people and playing games with their lives. And so I look forward to working with you and Chairman Chaffetz as we move forward.
And I thank the ranking member and agree that, it extends even beyond the students. It extends really to all Americans. It's very private data and even to their parents and others, and look forward to working that effort. The chair would like to recognize now the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Walker. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Camus, I want to ask you to describe the following 3 incidences, but I would just like for you to confirm them if you would, please. Specifically, the ones started in September of 2016. Was that incident involving the data retrieval tool, was that criminal in nature?
Yes, it was.
Okay, was that also, did the incident result in an indictment?
Yes, it did.
Okay, there's also one that was identified in November of 2016, and the third one was one on January 25th, 2016, by which a high number of taxpayer identification numbers were identified as being processed on the FAFSA that raised red flag. Did this result in a notification of a major incident to Congress?
No, it did not.
Okay. Mr. Garza, Ms. Garza, given the 3 separate incidents as described by TIGDUB that predated the major incident that resulted in the DR tool not being taken offline on March the 3rd, the question is, why was the data retrieval tool not taken offline earlier? Microphone, please. And if you would, could you pull that microphone a little closer and speak into it there? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Congressman, in regard to the September incident, we took immediate action by analyzing the data that we have, and we found that there was no evidence of a breach. The data was not lost. And we started working with the Department of Education to strengthen the authentication process for the data retrieval tool. I am not aware of the incident in November, and so I will have to go back and look at what the findings were for that.
Yeah, I don't understand the fact as far as saying, well, it wasn't breached, it wasn't breached. Yeah, I was just listening, thinking of my family back home. If I've got a security system, yet we have still people trying to break into that, at some point I'm going to be concerned, so, oh, well, nothing was taken, nobody was hurt, nothing was damaged. It doesn't make sense to me that there's not more action being taken here. Shouldn't the IRS be concerned about criminal misuse of the tool been sufficiently perked? Is that not something that's important?
Protecting the taxpayer data is our top priority. We were trying to balance the protection of the taxpayer data with the use of the tool, and that is why we reached out to the Department of Education to have discussions about what we could take. We saw this as action that we needed to take immediately, and we did take those actions to try to come up with a solution that would mitigate the risk.
Yeah, the key word is trying to come up with a solution. I'm not sure we've arrived at that. And according to Mr. Runcie's written testimony, after the October 2016 discovery that the DRT could potentially be vulnerable, the IRS increased monitoring of the tool for any suspicious activity. Could you describe what that increased monitoring looked like?
That is correct. We engaged with our TIGDA friends and asked them, as well as the new cyber analytics team that we have in place, to start looking for suspicious activity. And actually, it was because of that increased monitoring that we had done that we identified that there was suspicious activity occurring in January.
Yeah, there was an incident also in February this year, I believe. Was that discovered by accident?
We have mechanisms in place, multi-layer defense mechanisms. One of the mechanisms is a notification to the address of record to the individual whose data has been identified. That actually led us to identify that we had an issue. As we investigated that issue, we were able to find that, in fact, there was a fraud that had taken place, and we immediately shut down the application.
So for the record, you're saying that no, that it wasn't discovered by accident?
There was a notice that was generated to the taxpayer that had that taxpayer come in and notify us that there was something amiss.
To me, this is not only a question of taking responsibility for the IRS and department's web accessible services and data, but of understanding the cybersecurity risks these online services and applications face. And I certainly agree with the Ranking Member Cummings. These are young people's lives at stake, and as they're coming out, getting started, to be able to put them on a path where they're having to unravel this. I hope there's more of a sense of urgency to deal with this issue than what presently seems to be at the time. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and the chair would now like to recognize the gentlelady from New Jersey, Ms. Watson-Coleman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to all of you. Mr. Runcie, in September, the Inspector General reported that student loan companies misuse the department system to take advantage of students. As reprehensible as this finding is, this is not the first time student loan companies have acted against the best interests of the students they're supposed to be serving. In 2015, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the department conducted a public inquiry, finding a vast universe of complaints regarding loan servicers. And even more concerning, this current administration has withdrawn a series of policy memos that had been issued from the previous administration that were put in place to strengthen protections for student loan borrowers. Mr. Runcie, what impact would this action have on student loan borrowers, and do you think that this could aggravate the issue of predatory lending practices?
Well, in terms of our focus, our focus from a servicing perspective is to make sure that we have the highest quality outcomes for all the students and borrowers. And we've put in place a series of actions over the years, and right now we're going through a recompetition among the servicers that you referenced. Because we're in a procurement process, I can't really talk about specifics, but I will just reiterate that we are focused on having the highest quality product that we can from a servicing perspective and generating the best outcomes for students and borrowers.
Are you aware of a rollback of certain oversight and accountabilities that have been instigated or initiated in this administration that are overturning some of those accountabilities that were designed to protect students and vulnerabilities?
I personally am not aware of any rollbacks.
Is there anyone on this panel that has any knowledge of any recent actions on the part of either this administration through the White House or the Department of Education that will negatively impact the accountability of who is and who is not a good person or entity to work in this space? Is that a no? There's no one?
No.
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 Interesting. Okay. This January, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau filed a lawsuit against one of the nation's largest servicers of federal and private student loan, Navient. According to the lawsuit, Navient costs borrowers billions of dollars by withholding information about income-based repayment programs that could have lowered borrowers' monthly payments. Instead, it reportedly pushed borrowers into forbearance, suspending their payments, but not the accrual of the compounding interest. Mr. Runcie, are you familiar with these allegations in CFPB's lawsuit?
Yeah, I'm familiar with those allegations.
Navient services the student loans of more than 12 million borrowers, and roughly 6 million of whom are serviced through contractors with the Department of Ed. Is that so?
I believe that's right.
Navient sought to dismiss CFPB's complaint as part of its defense. It alleged, and I quote, "The servicer act is the lender's interest, is in the lender's interest, and there's no expectation that the servicer will act in the interest of the consumer." Is that right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
The servicer's act, the servicer,
Yes.
acts in the lender's interest, and there is no expectation that the servicer will act in the interest of the consumer.
I understand that statement. In the case of, private lenders, a servicer would be acting on the behalf of private lenders. That's right.
Does it concern you that companies like Navient publicly claim they have no responsibility to act in the best interests of the students they're supposed to be serving?
We are currently in a procurement process, and I can't make a comment on that, of which Navient is also in the procurement process, so I can't make a comment on that. We're making decisions about our servicers.
All righty, then I would expect that what you were going to do is to look at information such as this and not, we're not going to have to ask you again about someone like Navient, even though you can't express whatever is happening with regard to that company right now.
Yeah, what I can say is, I mean, we look at past performance, we look at responsibility metrics. There are criteria that we have to look at in terms of the process, but.
Well, I don't know by number the executive order or the rollback that just took place as it relates to looking back at a company's business and reputation. But I think that's something that you need to look at to see whether or not it does negatively impact your ability to ensure that the best is taking care of the best.
Absolutely.
Thank you. With that, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. Gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan's recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. Mr. Corbin, when did the IRS notify TIGTA that you guys had a problem?
So the notification to TIGTA for the incident on February 27th happened that same day.
So you guys talked to Mr. Camus and his guys on February 27th of this year.
I did not personally talk to
Someone
Mr.
at the
Camus,
IRS.
but someone at the IRS did,
Got
yes,
it.
sir.
And how many taxpayers are potentially harmed by the hacking and the breach that took place?
Approximately 100,000, sir.
100,000 people. And then the law requires you to notify Congress when something like this happens, doesn't it?
I'm not familiar with that, sir.
Well, I'll read it to you. This is a letter from your boss, Mr. Koskinen. The Federal Information Security Modernization Act and criteria provided in the Office of Management and Budget Guidance says this, that not later than 7 days after the date of an incident, you should notify Congress, right?
Correct, yes, sir.
Okay. So you're supposed to do it, and you're supposed to do it within 7 days. Is that accurate?
That sounds accurate, yes, sir.
Okay. It doesn't just sound accurate, that's the law.
Yes,
So
sir.
when did you tell Congress?
So I believe we notified Congress within that 7-day time frame, from what I know.
Really, is that true, Mr. Camus?
Mr. Jordan, I'm not sure when they made notification to Congress.
Because we don't have it until April 6th, which is a lot longer than 7 days. You learn on February 27th, you tell Congress on April 6th. Mr. Corbin?
I'd have to go back and check that, Congressman.
Well, that's important, right?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Koskinen testified on April 6th, and that's when he told us.
So
Testified in front of the Senate.
Yes, Congressman, I have to go back and take that back and confirm that for you, sir.
Well, I don't know that, well, we appreciate that, but this is when Congress first learned, was on April 6th, that there'd been an incident. And here's what the statute says. It says, not later than 7 days after the date on which there is a reasonable basis to conclude that a major incident has occurred. Would you describe this as major, Mr. Camus?
The fact that it impacted potentially 100,000 people, I would say so.
Same here. So we're wondering why you waited so long.
I don't have an answer for that, Congressman. I'll go back and find out for you.
We'd like to get that because, frankly, well, let me turn to Mr. Camus. Mr. Camus, is this the first time the IRS has waited to tell Congress some important information?
Mr. Jordan, I'm not aware. I can't answer your
Well,
question.
maybe I'll refresh your memory. There was a little incident that happened over the last several years where the Internal Revenue Service systematically and for a sustained period of time targeted taxpayers based on their political beliefs. You familiar with that situation, Mr. Camus?
I am familiar with that.
You did an investigation into that, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
A couple of investigations, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And was the IRS always forthcoming in a timely fashion with important information in that investigation you did, Mr. Camus?
We found that there were some mistakes that were made and some materials that should have been turned over. That's
Well,
correct.
that's a nice way of saying I appreciate that. You got maybe a career in politics after you're done at TIGTA, Mr. Camus, with that answer. Let me just refresh your memory. The IRS knew there was a gap in Lois Lerner's emails in February of 2014. They did nothing to stop the destruction of backup tapes, actually 421 backups. Do you remember this, Mr. Camus?
Yes, sir, I do.
Because it was your investigation that discovered they destroyed 421 backup tapes, right?
That's correct, sir.
Potentially 24,000 emails, right?
Yes, sir.
And that all happened in March of 2014, a month after they knew there was a gap in our emails. Mr. Koskinen testified in April of 2014, but you know when he told Congress? June 13th, 2014. Is that right, Mr. Camus?
That's correct.
So here we have again the Internal Revenue Service, an agency that has a little bit of influence and impact on American people's lives, with a major breach that the law says you're supposed to tell Congress within 1 week, within 7 days. And what do? They wait 38 days. And you know what? Here's what, to add insult to injury, think about what Mr. Walker, Congressman Walker just talked about. All the suspicious activity that took place before February 27th. In fact, when Mr. Koskinen testified and said, oh, we're putting you on notice, Congress, that there's been a major breach, 100,000 taxpayers potentially impacted, look at what he said in that testimony. He said this, April 6, 2017, Mr. Koskinen testifying in front of the Senate Finance said, quote, we started working with education in October, telling them we were very concerned that the system could be utilized by criminals. So, Mr. Koskinen was on notice that there was problems, potential big problems. He even used the term very concerned clear back in October of last year. We have the major breach take place on the 27th when the IRS tells you, hey guys, we got to look into this. This is real. We've had all these things happen, suspicious activities ahead of time, and they don't comply with the law and tell Congress within a week. They wait 38 days to tell us. It's not supposed to be how it works, is it, Mr. Camus?
Does not sound so.
No,
sir.
and the IRS, once again, the IRS is treating taxpayers the way they're not supposed to, and it's why this committee has been so focused on trying to clean up the mess over there, and frankly, I've been so focused on saying Mr. Koskinen has to go. With that, I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Ms. Plaskett, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I want to thank the lovely chairwoman this morning for the opportunity to speak. Thank you all for being here. Of course, everyone on both sides of the aisle are very concerned about this issue. Most of us have children and have our own student loans or have loans that we're helping with the children that we care very much about our future, as well as our constituents. I did, however, just wanted to touch on something that I know one of my colleagues spoke about just a few moments ago, Mr. Runcie, when they talked about the lawsuit with Avient. It is, however, understood that this is a lawsuit, so the interest of both parties, they both have allegations raised, but Navient does have a lower default rate than some of the other users or loan companies that, and they do have a propensity to loan to minority and underserved communities. Is that correct? I understood that the default rate of the students who have loans with Navient is significantly lower, potentially, than some of the other loan companies.
I would have to confirm that, and a lower default rate is better.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'd have to confirm that.
Okay.
And I know the portfolios aren't all the same. They have different compositions, and so sometimes there would be natural, differences in the default rates for the various services.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. Okay. The one thing that is really interesting as well, Mr. Runcie, when we're talking about the Inspector General's report, it seems, something that we're all very focused on. And the IG warned that the systems were, and I quote, being misused by commercial third parties to take over borrower accounts. This is something that Ranking Member Cummings talked about. These are things that we are really very keen on because these are, of course, students who are navigating a very difficult system. This is sometimes some of the first instances where they're really delving into their own finances, making decisions that are going to have an impact on them for the rest of their lives. So the commercial third parties are student loan companies and student loan consolidators. Is that correct when we're talking about
That is
the
right.
third parties that take over borrowers' accounts? And less than 2 weeks ago, this committee conducted an interview with the special agent in charge of conducting that investigations for the IG, and he explained to the committee that the information in these students' accounts is, quote, of commercial interest for loan consolidators, right?
Yes.
And that word commercial interest is very key to me. He also told us that student loan companies, and I quote, were controlling thousands of accounts or creating thousands of accounts and controlling them. Mr. Runcie, is this true? Were student loan companies actually using the information of individuals they are there to serve in a manner to control for commercial interests those accounts?
Yes, my understanding is that it's a fee for service, and so to the extent that they've got 1,000 clients, they're being charged for those services, so it would be a commercial endeavor.
And do you have a list of the names of those companies that were doing that?
We've identified some. I don't know that we have an exhaustive list of those companies.
Chairwoman, may I ask that we obtain a list of every student loan company that were involved in the activities? And Mr. Runcie, how long would it take you to provide something like that to the committee?
I don't want to commit because I'm not sure how readily available
Come
that
on, you
information
can't give me
is.
like, an outside range time or anything like that? No? A week, 2 weeks, a month?
I'd say if you give us a month, that would be appreciated.
Of course, he went to the outside of what I requested.
Hey, I don't want to negotiate against myself.
Got you. Very good. The special agent in charge also told us that student loan companies were, I quote, aggressively pursuing account holders and taking advantage of this. That sounds outrageous, and could you explain to me, not just what the aggressively pursuing, but what did he mean by taking advantage of them?
I don't want to speculate, but, you know, to the extent that they're providing services and they have account information, you know, they can receive correspondence on their behalf and make decisions on their behalf, and those decisions might benefit them commercially.
And are any of these same companies still doing business with the Department of Education?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Mr. Chairwoman, we have a responsibility to help protect students from the kind of abuse, and I'm so very pleased that we are having this hearing to go through this. And I believe the entire committee is very keen on holding a follow-up hearing within the next with the student loan companies that are actually engaged in these activities. And I hope that we could have the IG from the Department of Education testify about what they've found. Thank you very much for the information that you've provided us, and I hope, Ms. Chairwoman, we're able to do that. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Plaskett. First of all, I want to say thank you for your willingness to accommodate me on the floor the other night. It wasn't necessary, but I appreciate that. And I believe under the committee rules, you have the right to ask any witness for any information, and I'm sure that will be followed up with the staff. So thank you very much. Mr. Hurd, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I apologize if I review some information that has already been discussed in this hearing, but raise your hand. This is for all 5 of y'all. Raise your hand if you're responsible for FAFSA.gov. All right, let the record reflect. Mr. Runcie, Mr. Gray, and Ms. Garza raise their hand. Raise your hand if you're responsible for the DRT tool, or also known as the FSA-D tool. All right, let the record reflect. Ms. Garza and Mr. Corbin raises their hand. In October 25, 2016, IRS conducted an e-authentication risk assessment, and it concluded that the DRT tool was in need of stronger authentication measures. Is that correct, Ms. Garza?
Yes, it is, sir.
And were steps taken to improve the authentication measures?
We started to work with the Department of Ed.
Started to work with the Department of Ed. What steps, what did you actually do since October 25, 2016 to strengthen the DRT tool?
We increased monitoring on that application so that we could become alerted should we see something suspicious.
Were those efforts successful?
In January, it was those efforts that identified that there was suspicious activity occurring. And at that time, we partnered with the Department of Ed to get our 2 cyber teams together to review that suspicious activity. And we were informed by the Department of Ed that that was it was normal behavior.
What steps are being taken now to strengthen the authentication of DRT?
We have already developed and implemented an encryption solution on the IRS side. We are working with the Department of Ed.
How is encryption going to help with authentication if you have a user that has stolen credentials?
The authentication solution that we had looked at was not satisfactory to provide the usability of the application, so we have moved to an encryption. So unless that...
But that doesn't answer the question. The question is, how does encryption on the back end help with authentication of an attacker that is using stolen credentials?
It does not improve authentication. What it does do is does not allow the data to be revealed to someone other than the actual applicant.
But if you have stolen credentials, and you're not able, then you're able to spoof that you have the credentials. What are you doing to prevent that from happening?
There are a set of keys that on the IRS is only shared with the Department of Education. Okay. So as the applicant comes in and tells us to release the data to the Department of Education, they don't have access. They don't have the key to de-encrypt that data. It's only the Department of Education, once it gets to their side, that they will be able to de-encrypt the data.
Okay.
So that applicant.
So, Mr. Gray, how you're responsible for FAFSA.gov?
Yes, sir.
What are you doing to strengthen authentication if somebody has stolen credentials to actually authenticate it to the end user?
We are looking at several proactive measures to...
We are looking portends that you're doing something in the future. Do you have a past tense verb that you can use on what you have done?
For the department, we follow Defense in Depth, and we have a whole series of actions that we're taking to ensure that we protect our systems.
And what are those series of actions?
Some of them I referenced in my opening statement regarding data loss prevention, web access firewalls.
So how does data loss prevention help with authentication?
It would not. For authentication for FAFSA, this is the balance between, this is an application form where users are actually inputting their own data to gain access to apply for a student loan.
Yeah, I get that, and so, you got to. It's your responsibility, right, to confirm yes. that the person that's entering that data is indeed the person who owns that data. And I recognize this is a tough job. Okay, I recognize that what you have to do is difficult, but you still haven't explained to me. We've proven and we've seen with the theft of over 100,000 or the impact on 100,000 students that the authentication mechanism within FAFSA.gov and the DRT tool is lacking. And my concern is that everybody's doing this. And I want to know, what are you doing? And if there's not if you need additional authorities to improve authentication on FAFSA.gov, I want to hear that too.
Thank you. The authorities that I have through FATARA has been very adequate. In terms of what we're doing, this is the balance between accessibility of the tool, which at this point it is a web application where students and prospective borrowers are coming in to apply. The level of authentication for that is currently set where it is so that we can cast the net as broadly as we can to potential borrowers. The identity proofing piece comes in when we are dispersing the funds. For the DRT, the challenge, or what we're doing is, or looking at doing, is masking and encrypting the data so that if an identity thief logs in through our system, they will not see that data, which would not allow them to exploit this vulnerability.
Madam Chairwoman, I apologize for going over my time.
No problem. Without objection, I'm going to recognize Mr. Duncan for a unanimous consent request.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I realize you're not going to be able to get to me for questions, and so I simply want to make a unanimous consent request to include in the record at this point an email from one of my constituents, Melissa Macco, who is the financial aid administrator at the Tennessee College of Applied Technology, because she has 4 good suggestions to help with this problem in her email. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Ms. Kelly, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In recent years, hacking, identity theft, and cyber crimes have been on the rise. I've been the victim myself. Federal agencies have to do their part to secure their systems, but Congress must acknowledge the impact its own actions have had on the ability of agencies to protect their IT systems. Many agencies face serious challenges in modernizing outdated legacy IT systems and implementing stronger cybersecurity measures under the severe budget cuts that have been imposed by Republican-controlled Congresses. One of the agencies hit hardest by these cuts is the IRS. In May 2016, the IRS then Chief Information Officer Terrence Mulholland testified, and I quote, "The IRS budget system is the most critical challenge facing IT modernization." Mr. Corbin and Ms. Garza, what are the impacts of budget cuts on the ability of the IRS to modernize and secure IT systems? Are we putting taxpayers at greater risk?
So, Congresswoman, one of the things that Congress did do for us last year was appropriate the additional $290 million. We did take a portion of that funding to help us get the tools that Ms. Garza had described to help us identify and monitor our systems more closely. We also continue to invest in the Return Review Program, or RRP, and so that allows us to create rules and filters so that as returns come in, we're able to evaluate those returns and then for potential fraud or identity theft, and then stop those returns before they are actually paid out.
So I think it's on. I want to thank Congress for the money that we did receive. That was extremely beneficial. It allowed us to put new technologies in place that are actually protecting our systems at a much higher level than we had done in the past. In this incident itself, we were able to address the situation a lot quicker than we would have been able to in the past because of the new monitoring capability and the data analytics capabilities that we were implemented using those resources.
Mm-hmm. And would you say more is needed?
We would always be thankful for any additional resources or continued support in this area.
To make us more secure?
Yes.
Okay. It is not just IT systems that have been affected by these resource lapses. Mr. Mulholland testified last year that increased progress on systems modernization and cybersecurity measures, and I quote, will require significant sustained additional resources in the IT area. Do you agree with that assessment?
I would agree with Mr. Mulholland's assessment of our needs.
Mr. Corbin?
Yes, ma'am, I would agree as well.
Okay. Yet again, Congress has failed to ensure that agencies have the resources they need to carry out their missions. For instance, under the IRS Restructuring and Reform Act of 1998, Congress gained IRS the authority to hire a limited number of individuals to staff critical technical and professional positions at salary levels greater than general schedule rates. This critical pay authority was intended to help the agency attract highly qualified individuals with advanced technical expertise who might otherwise be available for government service at normal federal salary levels. The IRS used this authority to fill 168 of these positions from 1998 to 2013. Does critical pay play a role in making federal government jobs more appealing to highly qualified technical individuals who may be interested in public service but could be earning a much higher salary in the private sector?
Congresswoman, the streamlined critical pay authority that we had was extremely beneficial to the IRS. Because of that authority, we were able to bring on board high-level architects, engineers, and cybersecurity experts. Over the last several years, they have helped us ensure that we were doing what was needed to secure our perimeter and make sure that our systems were running much better. The important component of this was the streamlined part of the critical pay. It allowed us to offer a job when we found somebody after the announcement was made and we identified somebody much quicker than the normal process would have been. A lot of times what we found was without the streamlined component, when we got back to the individual to see if they were still interested, the time had elapsed so long that we were not able or they were no longer available or willing to come to work for us. So it is a critical component.
But this pay authority expired in 2013 and has not been reauthorized, so American taxpayers lose when Congress ignores its responsibilities. Congress can and should swiftly pass streamlined critical pay reauthorization and act to provide adequate resource levels for cybersecurity at all agencies. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. Mr. Iser, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I look forward to the reauthorization if we can get the reforms that were required as of our last couple of hearings on the use of those 168 slots. But let me go on to the actual data breach. Ms. Gaza, under your interpretation of a data breach, this is a data breach, right? It's a major incident, and it's a data breach. Is that correct?
Under the definition of data breach, it is classified as a data breach.
Okay, so we've had a data breach. Let me turn it around for a moment, because both you and Mr. Gray said that you had no, and I think Mr. Runcie all said the same thing. You had no information that personally identifiable information had specifically been compromised. That's pretty paraphrasing all of you.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, I'll go to IRS first. Ms. Gaza, you were there for the kickoff of the Affordable Care Act website, and as you know, in that website, if somebody looking at their information at the top of the screen simply went up there and changed the state, they might actually look at somebody's personally identifiable information. That was a vulnerability that was discovered right in there in the HTTP line, right? You remember that?
That was on the CMS side.
Right.
And so don't have any detail specifics
well,
on that.
Just for historical sake, I actually did it. You could, and somebody did it themselves, you could simply change the state and you could end up with somebody else's identifiable information on your screen. Now, they would have said that there was no breach, as Mr. Gray is sort of saying, because there was no proof anyone took that information and used it. But let me ask it another way. If you put a team of white knight hackers onto this vulnerability, could you have harvested information in your estimation?
I think the evidence is that after the fact, yes, there were people that were accessing that application for bad reasons.
Okay, so Mr. Gray, I want to get you on the record under oath with an accountable statement. If there's evidence that people did nefariously gain some information, whether they used it or not, and that a team of white knight hackers or bad people could have harvested information, don't you have to admit that this is, by definition, a data breach, not just a hypothetical vulnerability, but a vulnerability that was recognized that caused the shutdown of this tool?
Thank you for the question and the request for clarification. I would say that when I am speaking about a data breach, I'm speaking about the Department of Education systems. And through our analysis, there was no department data that was compromised or viewed through this. This was a case of unlawfully obtained information that was used to go through our system to pull information from the DRT.
Okay, but in this case, we're talking about you together represent like an automobile, and you're saying that your right-hand wheel didn't come off, but the left-hand wheel did or could have. Ultimately, the construction of the entire product was brought to a halt as a result of a failure, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. And both of you, I just want to make sure, because I heard Ms. Gaza say it, but both of you admit that under FATARA, under the reforms, as CIOs, you have budget authority and the authority necessary to shut down or to make what changes are needed to control the security and accuracy of your work. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so now my question to you in the short time remaining is, although this is about education and it's about the tremendous impact on students who will have a burdensome time applying, if we are to do the next level of reforms that this committee would be required to, if we've given each of you authority, and one of you says, I've got a breach, and the other says, I don't, how do we resolve within the hierarchy of the executive office of the president, so to speak, how do we resolve making sure that the failure of the whole is in fact controlled by somebody? In other words, I'm looking at the two of you. You gave slightly different testimony. I think you've come together on testimony. But I want to know how in the future we do two things. One, make sure that somebody above you, sort of a super CIO, can make sure that somebody's looking at the entire vehicle and not just a left tire and a right tire. And then secondly, where were those white knights in this process? Where were the people who scrubbed this, third parties who scrubbed this data and system trying to find those vulnerabilities? Because somebody found it, and it wasn't either of your teams. Take an answer from either of you in the time I'm allowed.
I don't know where those white knights were, sir. I do know that there were other entities within the government, USDS specifically, that was assisting with this as well. So I don't know where they were.
Okay, so as Will said earlier, before the fact, you don't know. After the fact, of course, you could recreate it. Ms. Gaza, the two questions to you. You're very senior in this position. You've had a lot of experience. One, how do we bring together organizations like you that have become interdependent to make sure there's oversight of the entire combined authority? And two, how do we make sure there are white knights proactively in the future to try to find these things and maybe to concurrently and constantly try to find them?
Congressman, we actually do have processes in place where we do penetration testing, where we have individuals that come in and test our applications to ensure that they are not subject to white hat hackers coming in and getting away with the data.
Although white hackers I'm okay with.
White hackers, black hats.
Bad guys.
So we do have that process in place, and we do use it. I don't recall right now if that process was utilized on this application. It clearly should have, and perhaps we would have been able to avoid this. As far as your other question, as the IRS continues to work with other agencies to provide data, it becomes more and more important that we actually address the concern that you have raised. I don't have an answer for you right now, but it's something that we need to be very thoughtful about, because I think this is going to start happening more often.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Time has expired. In the prerogative of the chair, I think it would be helpful to this committee and to the Congress as a whole to get some sense of what kind of priority you put on testing your systems, because it's pretty obvious that something like this should have been tested and should have been aggressively tested anytime you're sharing data with another agency. So I hope the committee will follow up on that. Mr. Raskin, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
And Madam Chair, thank you very much. Mr. Runcie, there's been a documented pattern of abuse with the student loan companies for many years now. Lots of scams have taken place. In 2012, the IG reported that a student loan company improperly accessed student borrower accounts to change the contact information of the borrowers in order to, quote, make it difficult for the borrowers to be contacted by their loan servicers. Why would they do that? What's the scam? Can you explain to us how that works for them?
Thank you. So they're commercial entities, and they're fee-for-service entities. So
these are legitimate businesses then? These are not internet scammers? Or
they're not internet scammers, but the nature of the interaction between those entities and the students and borrowers, I can't characterize that, but they're businesses that are formed to provide commercial services, whether it's loan consolidation or something else. It seems and it appears that in cases where they want to have a level of control to create a transaction or to continue through the process, they change email addresses and potentially mailing addresses and so forth to facilitate the process that they're taking the students and borrowers through.
But how do they profit from it? They take over the student's account?
It's a fee. They may charge, and I'm just going to make up a number. Let's say they charge $100 per consolidation or more. So there's an agreement that they will consolidate the loans and create a lower payment amount or whatever the agreement is, and they would be paid for that.
So did this actually take place? I mean, in one example, the IG reported in 2013, a company charged borrowers a monthly fee, I think it was $60, in order to put their loans into forbearance with the promise of enrolling them in the public service loan forgiveness program eventually, which they weren't qualified for. But did that actually happen with people?
My understanding is that there are these companies that provide these services, and a part of that process sometimes is they put people in forbearance with the understanding that they're ultimately going to go into consolidation. So those are third-party entities involved in a transaction that doesn't include the department, except for the fact that they're using the email addresses and the resources that we have to facilitate transactions where they make money.
So just to get you straight there, they're using your website essentially as the framework to access their victims, then they prey on the people, but as far as you know, they might still be in this scam relationship with the students.
Yeah, we've looked at IP addresses, and we've looked at some of the activity, and in some cases, you will actually see loan consolidations, whether it's 10% or 100% of their clients, we don't know. What we've stressed is user education to make sure people are aware that they can get these services done for free by leveraging resources that the department provides.
Well, I get complaints on a daily basis pretty much from my constituents who feel like the whole system's a scam, but you're talking about a scam on top of a scam in a way. You're talking about people who are in serious debt from college, and then some of these kind of low-riding companies are able to access them, charge them more money to offer them either real or completely illusory services, right?
That's right.
Okay, who is the ombudsman and champion of America's students and college graduates who's looking out for the scams in the IRS, the Department of Education, at every level of government? Is there anybody?
I think we play a role, the department plays a role. So, for instance, I mentioned user education. The IG has noticed that this is an issue, and we're doing some things with our systems to make sure that we give them an additional tool or lever that they can use to prosecute bad entities. So, we play a role in that. And
how many prosecutions have there been since this was revealed?
I don't have that information.
Have there been any prosecutions?
We don't prosecute. It would have to be through the IG or some other.
And let me just say, I know everybody up there is working hard for the American people and has a tough job, but the overall institutional sense that I get is one of basic passivity and reactivity to events, rather than getting on top of it. We've got millions of people who are carrying these loans. I think there's more student debt in America than there's credit card debt now. It's more than $1 trillion. And obviously there's a lot of money being made there, including by people who are going out and preying on people who are already laboring under the burden of these loans. Do we need to create an ombudsperson, somebody who's just a champion of the students and the graduates to make sure that they're not getting ripped off at every step of the process?
Yeah, I mean, we have an ombudsman, but it's not a sort of a pervasive, all-inclusive person that sort of channels resources across government, across IGs, across operations. So that is potentially something that could be useful. But
where is that ombudsperson located? Is that
the ombudsman is located within FSA? They deal with complaints and issues that we can resolve. They're operational issues, the customer service issues. They could be school-related issues. But in terms of
did that person ever raise any of these issues with you about scams being perpetrated on students through the website?
No, those scams are done by third-party entities that are outside of our scope. And
so basically, it was nobody's responsibility to try to identify that threat. Is that right? I mean, that's not a gotcha question. I'm just trying to figure out, prevent this from happening again. Because there were cases of this going back 4 or 5 years now.
Yeah, again, the commercial entities that are marketing to students to provide services to those students, and the students agree to, obtain those services, and the questionable nature and value of those services is not something that we police. What we've been trying to do is provide user education and let people know that they don't need to use these resources. And we've, working with partner organizations and so forth, but we don't have any control over those entities.
Thank you very much for your answers, and I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Raskin. Mr. Heiss, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Corbin, do you have any idea how much the IRS loses to fraudulent tax returns each year?
No, Congressman, I can bring that back for you or go back and get that information for you.
Please do, but would it surprise you that in 2013 alone, it was over $5 billion? Does that come as a surprise to you?
It does not come as a surprise, Congressman.
Okay. So it's no surprise that over $5 billion, let's just say that's the average a year, $5 billion a year, plus or minus, in fraudulent returns. And now, as has been clearly established, ballpark 100,000 taxpayers were put at risk as thieves breach the DRT here. Do you have any idea how many fraudulent returns resulted from those 100,000 taxpayers?
So, Congressman, what I know is that we have received about 111,000 returns filed under those Social Security numbers. Of those returns, 80% of them were either stopped by our filters prior to the refunds being paid, or they were the actual legitimate taxpayer.
Well, that's good information, but that was not my question. I want to know how many fraudulent tax returns came from those 100,000.
Yes, sir. We have confirmed about 29,000 returns as identity theft.
Okay, and how many of those were fraudulent is my question. Commissioner Koskinen said it was about 8,000.
Yes, well, Congressman, there are 8,000 returns that were not stopped by our filters that we have not been able to determine.
That were fraudulent.
That we have not been able to determine if they were fraudulent or the legitimate taxpayer.
Okay, well, that was my question. I'd appreciate if you'd answer the question rather than run around it. Do you have any idea how much money was lost due to those 8,000 fraudulent returns?
I believe that is about $32 million, sir.
It is about $30 million. Does the IRS reimburse the fraudulent tax returns from those who are victims?
So when a true taxpayer comes in and files their return, they do get their full refund that they're entitled to.
Okay, and who pays for that?
That comes out of the Treasury, sir.
So the taxpayers pay for it?
Yes, sir.
So we had 32 million just out of this 100,000 people, 8,000 fraudulent returns. So is that 30 million, does it include the reimbursement from the victims?
No, sir, it does not.
All right, so we're talking $60 to $65 million in this one incident. We're talking, if we have $5 billion a year in fraudulent returns, we're probably talking $10 billion that it costs the taxpayers every year after the victims are paid back. Is that?
So of the 32 congressmen, again, we have not confirmed whether that is a fraudulent return or the true tax.
Okay, I'm just going by what Commissioner Koskinen said, and I would think that he would be accurate in that information. Ms. Garza, I'm still scratching my head over your comments earlier that as far as you're concerned, you didn't know of any breach whatsoever. And yet it's pretty well confirmed there was a breach here, and you even came back around and admitted that a little while ago.
It depends on the timing, sir. In September,
It depends on whether or not anyone broke into the system. That is what determines a breach. And it just, I tell you, I just struggle. It appears to me at the end of the day where you're either in denial of what happened or you're incompetent, you're just untruthful in what's happening here. And I go back with what's been shared too. There's the abuse that's been inflicted on American citizens by the IRS is inexcusable, and it's time that there's accountability and some change that takes place at the IRS. This is just, it's so bothersome, it's indescribable. Mr. Gray, let me come to you. It's my understanding that the department may have the data retrieval tool operation for the purposes of income-based repayment plans back up in May or June. Is that correct?
That is my understanding, sir.
Okay. That being said, if it's going, this it's taken more or less 3 months to fix it, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. If it's taken 3 months, why in the world was this not addressed last fall?
Unfortunately, I can't answer that question because I'm not involved.
Who can answer that question?
Mr. Runcie.
It wasn't addressed last. I think it's what we had said a little bit before, which was we were making a decision at the time based upon the fact that there wasn't any criminal activity. What the commissioner had said was we would continue to monitor the situation, and once there was confirmed criminal activity, we would take the system down. So that was the focus of it. And then March 3rd, when we were contacted, the system was taken down.
The commissioner said that identity thieves used it to put forth false tax returns and made it clear that there was criminal activity and that because of such, the system was going to have to be shut down. Looks like we're talking out of both sides of our mouth. Madam Chair, I thank you for indulging me extra time. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Heiss. Mr. Clay, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I find it deeply concerning that the Trump administration has started rolling back the protections that help ensure that students are not taken advantage of by predatory loan companies. Mr. Runcie, Secretary of Education, DeVos, recently rolled back a critical protection put in place during the Obama administration. This protection prohibited loan servicers from charging up to 16% in interest on overdue student loans if borrowers entered a loan rehabilitation program within 60 days of default. Mr. Runcie, why did she rescind that protective order?
I'm not aware. There was a policy memo that was rescinded. Is that what you're referring to, Representative Clay?
Yes.
Yeah. So we're in the process of going through a competition for servicers. And the focus of that competition is to make sure that we have the best contract in place that's focused on high-quality outcomes for students and borrowers. So that's what we're focused on. There hasn't been anything communicated from the Secretary that would change our ability to go forward and to make sure that there's a vehicle in place to make sure that we optimize outcomes for students and borrowers.
Now, doesn't that action place the financial interests of the loan companies over the interests of our students?
That's not what we're doing, and that's not what's been communicated to us.
Well, wait a minute now. Does it signal to loan companies that they can return to the predatory practices they engaged in before that take advantage of students? Look, I mean, look, you and I know that people struggle to pay these student loans. So they came up with a way to give them some kind of relief, and now we're going to throw that out?
No, I share your focus on making sure that we have the best circumstances for borrowers and students. And if you look at income-driven repayment plans, which is a tool that was put in place to make it easier for students to manage their obligations and their debt, that has risen substantially. Our servicers and the department's focused on making sure people get into plans that allow them to maintain and manage their debt.
Okay, let's talk about those plans. Just last month, the Secretary withdrew another critical consumer protection afforded to student borrowers. Under the Secretary's order, contracts for debt collection will no longer be based on a loan company's history of helping borrowers, but can again be based on a company's ability to collect debt. Can you explain why this change was made?
Actually, the evaluation, and again, we're in procurement mode, so there are certain things I can't talk about, but the actual evaluation does include looking at past performance and responsibility as well as operational performance. So it is, the process is more than just looking at the ability to recover.
Yeah, but doesn't that go back to allowing these companies to prey on borrowers? I mean, and make that the standard operating procedure that at all costs collect the debt?
I can't speculate on that, sir.
And look, there have been troubling reports recently that the department is reversing previous determinations that student loan borrowers qualified for a loan forgiveness program to encourage public service. Borrowers may have relied for years on these determinations to plan their educations, their careers, and their lives. And this program started in 2007. Under this program, borrowers can have the remainder of their federal student loans forgiven after making 10 years' worth of payments if they serve in full-time and public service jobs. Is that what's going on?
I'm aware of the issue, and my understanding is that there's potentially some litigation around that. But the public service loan forgiveness is a vehicle that's out there. If you make payments for 10 years on time, you could be forgiven the remainder of that. That program's in place, and we operationalize it.
And are you intending on changing it?
I'm not aware that there's any intention to change it. That's an overall departmental perspective.
It all comes down to let's scam these students, let's scam these borrowers, and let's take care of these servicers. And I think you should be ashamed of yourselves.
Well, what I can say is that, and I can say this personally, is that there's a dedicated staff at the department that's been there for quite some time, and our focus is not to facilitate or aid and abet any situation that compromises students and borrowers. We're committed to making sure they have the resources to be successful. We know it's difficult, it's a huge portfolio, but my intention is the same as your intention, which is to make sure that we don't have a structure that compromises any.
God help the borrowers.
The gentleman's time has expired. The ranking member is recognized for unanimous consent request.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to just submit for the record a letter dated May 1st, 2017 to the Honorable Kathleen Tig, just requesting certain documents with regard to this hearing.
Without objection. The chair will recognize herself for 5 minutes. I have to say that I agree with my colleague from Georgia who was here a few minutes ago that this situation of none of you all or people in your agencies being willing to take responsibility for what's happened, either you're in denial or incompetent. I think the American people watching this are feeling the same way. I'm troubled by my colleagues wanting to distract from the incompetence of the FSA and the IRS on display here today. I want us to go after any bad actors outside the system, but our number one priority is to protect the American people. And everybody who works in this country is affected by the IRS. So yes, we want to protect students from any unsavory characters, but all Americans are affected by the IRS if they file their taxes, and most of them do. Thank goodness we have a system where most people voluntarily do what they're supposed to do. So the problem we have with our government agencies is there's no accountability for any of you individually, and that is a shame, a real shame on this country, that you all can ignore the continued incompetence and not be held responsible. I do have some questions. The department has taken some steps, Mr. Gray, Mr. Runcie, to mitigate the burdens on students, families, and institutions caused by the DRT suspension. But I'm concerned about the potential fraud the flexibilities you've put in place may cause. How is the department protecting against fraudulent income reporting or ensuring that no new doorways to fraud are open in this process? And I'd like specifics, please.
Well, in terms of, and thank you, Chairwoman Fox, in terms of specifics, as you know, the verification, the back-end verification is something that we've used along with, the schools. So we do regression analysis, and we come up with a formula that indicates a level of risk. And so what we've done in terms of giving flexibility is we would reduce the lowest risk element based upon a regression analysis, so that even if we lessen the verification burden, it would be on a risk mitigated basis. So we would only eliminate the lowest risk applicants potentially. So the other part is that we're going to do this for a limited period of time, right? Because we're going to get the tool back up October 1st, and so for all the FAFSA cycles going forward, that won't be an issue. So it's somewhat of a temporary way to to balance the burden to the schools against the risk to taxpayers.
Mr. Gray, do you have anything to add to that?
I would, yes, ma'am. I would say that there are also technical controls that we're looking at putting in place, and I would be happy to give a more in-depth details about those controls specifically, but I would not want to reveal sensitive information right here.
I understand. So, Mr. Runcie, you touched on this a minute ago, that you're trying to get the system back up for the 2018 FAFSA filing period. Recognizing the balance between security and access, can you make the commitment to ensure there's no opportunity for the DRT to be misused again when it is once again operational? And I want to ask each one of you, answer that question, yes or no. Mr. Runcie?
Yes, because
That's all I need
okay,
to know.
Yes.
Mr. Gray?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Garza?
I'm unsure.
You're not sure. Mr. Corbin?
I'm also unsure.
Mr. Camus?
We will be watching closely.
I think you've given the American people great confidence today from the IRS when you tell us you cannot secure the systems. Mr. Runcie, I want to come back to you. I've been hearing troubling reports regarding the collection of defaulted student loans, and we've been hearing a lot about that in here this morning. Currently struggling borrowers in default are without the critical services needed to rehabilitate their loans or access other benefits designed to lessen the impact of default. This is the responsibility of the department. Can I get a commitment from you and the department to provide my staff with critical information needed to assess the current loan default situation?
Absolutely.
And when?
2 weeks.
And when? Can we get, when will we know what the critical information is? When will you get that to us?
So we can define what the critical information is within 2 weeks, and we could get you the information within a month. So we'll have that to you within a month.
Thank you for telling us that. We will hold you to it.
Thank you.
Mr. Connolly, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. I just want to say the breach at the Department of Education is something we've been warning about in this committee for quite some time. Department of Education holds data on 139 million individuals. And I would echo what our colleague from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, said, that the Department of Education may very well be in breach of law. And we're going to explore that. However, I know, what happened? Mr. Scott. I was just going to yield to Mr. Scott. Is he? He had to go. All right. Sorry. Then I'll pursue. Mr. Gray, are you familiar with FSMA?
Yes, sir, I am.
And what does FSMA require you to do, the Department of Education?
To protect our information assets for the department.
Well, that's not all it does. Doesn't it have a reporting requirement with respect to the legislative branch?
Yes, sir, it does.
And what is that reporting requirement?
Within 7 days of an incident to report.
And did the Department of Education comply with that 7-day reporting requirement?
Sir, through our analysis of nearly 89,000 Social Security numbers, we did not identify that department data was compromised in this situation. This was a situation where unlawfully obtained information was used to go through our system to access information through the DRT, which is why we did report it to U.S. CERT, And when it was identified that the compromise was through the DRT, that is when we did not report this as a major incident, because our information, meaning the information that the department holds, was not compromised.
And is that still your position?
Yes, sir.
So from your point of view, FSMA has not been triggered?
A major breach of department information was not compromised.
Is that the language of the law? That a major breach has to be compromised? That is to say, a major breach has to lead to the compromise of data?
No, sir. When the IRS reported this, and we were notified on March 3rd, it was identified as an IRS system. It was not a Department of Education system. We did thorough analysis of all of our system through FAFSA, and nothing indicated, to my knowledge, that any of our information was compromised.
Mr. Camus, is that your view?
We haven't yet to determine the timeliness of the reporting of the incident, sir.
No, that's not my question. My question is, do you concur with Mr. Gray that there was no breach of data, compromise of data?
We would view it as if once somebody was able to see somebody else's data, that in fact has been a breach.
So I would too, and therefore I would argue FSMA is triggered. Would you agree?
Yes, sir.
Well, Mr. Gray, it sure does sound like you're splitting hairs, and you're coming up with a criterion that was not envisioned in the law itself, nor is it reflected in the language of the law itself. I mean, we don't have traffic laws that allow you to decide, well, I didn't hurt anyone. Yeah, I was speeding, but I didn't hurt anyone, so therefore I shouldn't get a ticket. I mean, the law is there to make sure the legislative branch is informed in a timely fashion when this kind of activity occurs. And the reason isn't so that we're keeping score. It is to make sure that we're doing what we can on our part to protect sensitive data of American citizens. And it seems to me that it was incumbent upon the Department of Education to inform us in a timely fashion. In fact, I would even argue if I were managing the Department of Education, on the better part of wisdom would dictate that I informed them even if I didn't believe FSMA was triggered. But the fact that months could go by, and as Mr. Camus just said, a breach is a breach. Once it's breached, you have to assume that data is compromised, if not today, tomorrow, because it can be. And I just don't find your explanation very credible, and I frankly think it's a disservice to the people whose data you possess. And it's an end around with respect to the legislative branch, and I think it's in violation of the law. I know we're going to pursue that more, but I don't think that's something that puts the Department of Education in any kind of good light. My time is up, and I'm sorry I missed Mr. Scott. I was going to defer to him. I thought I was being asked to. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly, and thank you for honing in on the issue of the day and looking for what remedies we might have under the law. Mr. Meadows, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We're going to follow up Mr. Gray right now, because I can tell you that Mr. Connolly is spot on, and this is not your first rodeo. You know, we have had these other issues before with regards to privacy, and is it your sworn testimony today that this did not actually require notification of Congress?
No, sir. My understanding is that the IRS had reported the incident and that it was a breach. But the Department of Education, my understanding, when I was notified on March 3rd, that the notification had already happened. I have learned in this hearing that it did not happen.
Well, how can the American people, actually people who share private information with you, who expect it to be protected, have confidence when you're here today and you don't even know the full story, that you're finding it out in a hearing when you knew that we were going to be looking at this? How can you find a hacker who truly wants to come in and do harm, and you can't even be prepared for sworn testimony today on questions that I presume that you knew we were going to ask.
I understand, sir. The challenge.
Where's the outrage? Where is the outrage, Mr. Gray? Are you not outraged?
I absolutely am.
Why didn't you notify Congress?
My understanding was this was not of Department of
Well, you realize that was not, did you have your counsel that said you don't have to notify us? Who did you check with who said you don't need to notify Congress?
We went through our incident response process, who did an assessment.
So why did you refer something to an outside agency before you notified your own IG within your department?
Our IG was notified right after we were.
Well, but according to my documents, you actually notified U.S. CERT first, according to your testimony. Why would you do that and wait to get the IG involved?
Because when we notify U.S. CERT, it's to let them know that we were investigating something that had occurred. At that time, we weren't sure what had happened.
Okay, so the IG, you go, you notify the IG. It was important enough to notify the IG, but it was not important enough to notify Congress.
Hindsight, sir, yes, it was important enough to notify Congress.
Well, at what point are we going to get this right? Because we continue to have breaches. Mr. Conley and I have had a number of hearings where we've raised this as a concern, and yet what happens is we're always coming in after the fact to look at this. Do you not see a problem with that?
I do see a problem with that.
Well, when are we going to get it fixed?
Sir, we receive on average more than 1.5 million intrusion attempts every single month at the department. And what my team does is we assess to determine whether or not something had happened, nothing happened. And logistically, I mean, I know in this case it's easy to look and say, okay, this should have been reported. I understand that.
So you're saying it's a matter of logistics on why you didn't report it? Because that's different than what you said earlier. Earlier you said you didn't think you had to report it.
Based on the analysis that my team did, our information, the information that
So how confident are you that there was only 89,000 people that were affected?
Based on the log analysis that was done at the department, very confident.
All right, a 10?
Yes, sir.
So if we find out there's more than that, are you willing to resign?
If I don't know the information, no, sir. I mean,
well, you said you're confident at a level of 10, so I guess I would stake my reputation on that if you're confident at a 10. So if there's more than that, because the IRS knows that sometimes we find out that there's actually more people that were affected than was originally thought. So if you're confident at a 10, are you willing to stake your reputation and your job on it?
So, sir, the challenge here is that
Sir, I am representing people back home in North Carolina, as every member here is, and you know what? They fail to realize that you can't protect sensitive information that they give you, and they don't understand that. I don't understand it. At what point are we going to have a confidence when people share their information with the government that it is not subject to being shared with another party? Isn't that what your job's all about as CIO?
Yes, sir.
All right. The next time, are you going to inform Congress when there may be a doubt? Will you inform us within the 7 days?
Absolutely.
All right. Ms. Garza, last question to you. Why didn't you inform us?
Congressman, we briefed the staff shortly after we brought down.
You didn't brief our staff. Why didn't you inform Congress? That's the question of the day. Because according to your TIGDA, it's 100,000, so it certainly even meet that threshold. But why wouldn't you inform us?
So, Congressman, we did inform the Congress that this was a data breach. The reason why it took as long as it did is because we were going through analyzing the information. The initial population was much smaller than 100,000 that we thought were impacted. We also needed to coordinate with the Department of Education to determine whether this
But didn't you find it just based on dumb luck? It was actually just one of your IRS employees that actually got a transcript request, and they said, hey, something doesn't smell right here?
Congressman, we have multiple layers of,
That's not the question. Wasn't it dumb luck that you happened to find this?
no.
So it wasn't an IRS employee that happened to get a transcript? Be careful, you're under sworn testimony here.
It was an IRS employee. He received a notification as part of one of our defense mechanisms that his account had been accessed.
So it was an IRS's employees who happened to have his stuff that was notified, and we said, hold on, we got a problem here? Do you not see that that is almost laughable?
One of our mechanisms to determine whether something has gone wrong is a notification to the taxpayer. Our systems automatically send out a notification.
So you purposely embed IRS employees in all this so that they might get a personal notification so they can highlight this? Come on, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank the panel. 10 years ago, I was proud to lead the effort here in the House, and we teamed up with Senator Kennedy on the Senate side to create the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, and we've paid close attention to that over the last 10 years, working with the U.S. Department of Education along the way to create online resources to help borrowers understand whether they're going to qualify for this program, which includes reduced monthly payments, as well as ultimate forgiveness of their outstanding principal if they commit 10 years to public service. That includes the need to be assured that the employment you have, the particular employer that you're working for, qualifies under that public service category, and that you can count the time spent with that employer towards your 10 years and ultimately earn the forgiveness. Congressman Clay alluded a moment ago to the fact that there's some troubling position that the U.S. Department of Education has been taking over the last 18 months with respect to certain categories of employers. They're now telling borrowers who relied on an assurance that that employer would qualify, being told now that it won't, and there is some litigation around that. Mr. Runcie, as you indicated, we need to get to the bottom of that because there are borrowers that have relied on assurances that have come from the department, and they need to be able to count on that. Otherwise, the rug is being pulled out from under them. I know that some of us here have been trying to get a briefing from the department over the last few weeks. That has not yet happened. Could you commit to us today that the department will be willing to brief us on this issue and what's happening with that?
It's not just FSA. I mean, we obviously operationalize it and we put the resources out there so people can avail themselves of public service loan forgiveness. But I think that briefing would include other entities such as OGC and policy, and some other folks.
Well, that's fine. Can you help us arrange to get that briefing done and get it done quickly so we know what's happening with this, and then we can take appropriate steps in our oversight capacity?
No, absolutely. It is an important issue, and I think we're real focused on it, so I will absolutely commit to working, with my colleagues to see.
Now, let me stay focused on the public service loan forgiveness piece and loan-driven repayment, because when you talk about the universe of borrowers out there that are impacted by the breach that we're talking about today, using this data retrieval tool, you have the part of that universe that are folks that are, involved with standard repayment. And then you have those who are in a loan-driven repayment situation based on one program or the other. That includes public service loan forgiveness, and they have to be handled differently because they're impacted differently. And you've indicated that with respect to the standard repayment world that you're going to try to get this tool back in service by the beginning of the next year, so October is the goal, but with respect to loan-driven repayment, you're trying to get that back up by May. So can you tell us how confident you are that, it is May now, how confident are you that that is going to be available to folks that are benefiting from loan-driven repayment arrangements? Is that going to happen?
Yeah, we're very confident. As the IRS mentioned, they've completed the encryption part, and we have a timeline that gets us to a place where it's up and running by the end of this month. So we know it's only another few weeks, but we can commit to that.
I appreciate that. Could you also let me know, I know one of the remedies or sort of stopgap remedies when someone is in this situation of perhaps not being able to access a tool that allows them to do things in a timely fashion is forbearance for 2 months, 3 months, what have you. That can work okay for the standard repayment folks because there's really no downside to losing a couple of months in terms of your repayment. But if time is of the essence in the sense that you're accruing time towards this 10-year repayment period, then forbearance isn't necessarily going to be a great solution for people that are in the loan-driven repayment category. Is that something that the department has considered, and is there a way to provide a remedy there that doesn't complicate the lives of these folks that are in a particular program like that?
Yeah, I'll make sure that we are, I know we're considering a lot of different issues around it, and I believe that's one, but we'll certainly make sure that we're focused on that because I do understand the issue around that.
Okay, I yield back. Thank you.
Wanted to add one thing, and we're pretty firm on the end of May, unless potentially some requirements change, but I think we're committed to the end of May for the tool being back up for the income-driven repayment plans.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Sarbanes. Thank you, Mr. Runcie. Mr. Mitchell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I join your dismay that rather than discuss the data breach, the impact it has on the ability of students to get assistance, how we deal with the data breach going forward and avoid it, that some wish to talk about issues that we're now going to investigate as well, which is potential bad actors. To obfuscate what the current issue is, which is the IRS and the Department of Ed's inability to have this tool work and not have it breached, but rather talk about other issues. We only have so much time here. We only have so many things we can do simultaneously. Let's talk about the issue we put on the table. So I'm dismayed, and I guess I shouldn't be surprised. Mr. Connolly, Mr. Gray, you've seen The Wizard of Oz, right?
Yes, sir.
You see the part where they talk with a scarecrow and they ask him which way the Yellow Brick Road is? Remember that part?
Yes, Representative.
And the scarecrow goes like this? Do you remember that part?
Yes, sir.
My opinion, frankly, sir, that's exactly what you're doing when you talk about, well, the data breach happened at the IRS, and we didn't think it was us, so we didn't need to worry about notification. You know, when you've got something as sensitive as personal information for the number of students that you have, the moment in time that you think your data has been breached, you have a legal, if not moral, if not legal responsibility to notify Congress. That's a lot of information. And it wasn't done. And it's not the first time it wasn't done. And I don't understand that. And I don't know how it is we get across to the department that's their responsibility by law, if not morally. What's it take to get someone to understand that over there? Can you explain that to me?
I have committed that I will do that, sir.
I ran a private career school group that had 6,000 students a year, close to 7,000 students a year. For 6.5 years, I was a CEO. Ms. Garza, do you know what the CIO reported to me for a reason? Do you know the deal I had with the CIO if we got hacked? And we didn't have as many hack attempts as the Department of Ed, let's be honest about it. Do you know what the deal was? Do you want to guess what the deal was if we got hacked?
You held the CIO accountable?
The CIO's resignation was on my desk. That's how sensitive that information was. And I am serious. I'm absolutely serious. I'll give you his phone number. You can call him. His resignation was on my desk. His cell phone got buzzed anytime there was certain sets of activities, whatever hour of the night. Now, who in your staff gets called in the middle of the night or gets a buzz if, in fact, data goes out of whack? Anybody?
The CISO is the first one that gets a call, and then depending on the type of breach, she will call me.
Let me change the subject for a moment here because time is limited. I've heard repeatedly budget concerns. I come from the private sector, and I'm absolutely amazed. The first time a problem comes up, everyone wants to whip out the taxpayer's checkbook because, hey, just spend more money. From the world I come from, we first identify the problem it takes to solve it, not just throw money at it. So answer a question for me, Ms. Garza. And by the way, I mean, we all know how many people have had their data hacked, false tax returns. I had it happen to me. My youngest son is dealing with it right now this year. How much money do you need to tell this group, to tell Congress that you can secure the system? Exactly how much do you need in your budget that you'll put your letter of resignation there if you get hacked? How much money?
I don't know how much money it would take.
Well, you ask for more money all the time.
We ask for additional resources to continue to fortify
Every
our
year.
systems.
Every year.
That's correct.
I asked you a question. How much money do you need in your budget for data protection that you'll put that budget request in and simultaneously you'll tender your resignation that if you get hacked, you go home?
I don't have that dollar amount in my mind. What I do know is that criminal enterprises are constantly changing.
Oh, I understand
in their
that.
tactics. And so to make a statement that we can guarantee a system is secure, quite frankly, is a little bit folly. We are doing everything that we can to make sure that our systems are secure. We have not had a breach of our internal systems, although we have had data loss. And so to try to come up with a dollar amount that would guarantee that something will not occur, I think at that point I would think that we're probably not going to end up being secure.
And my time is expiring. I appreciate the patience. Anywhere else in the world, in the private sector, at least somebody says, we really screwed up here. At least someone says, boy, we missed, they take accountability for it. My technology staff took it personally when someone tried, when we had people trying to hack it, when we had how we secured it. It was the game. It was their life. And the fact that folks can sit here and say, well, basically, stuff happens. But when you're talking about people's information to the Department of Education or IRS, it's not just stuff happens, it's their life. It's their tax return. It's their personal information used to get credit elsewhere. This is not minor stuff. And I don't see the perspective of concern that, well, we'll do the best we can. If it's wrong, we may notify, we may not notify, we may not think it's our problem because it's the IRS's problem. Again, they went that away. Someone needs to be accountable for it, folks. And I'll join Mr. Connolly and others in finding a way we're going to hold folks accountable because we can't have this kind of data leaking out, people taking it and using it for adverse purposes. You should be ashamed. I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Maloney, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Lady Chair. We need to do everything we can to prevent cyber attacks from occurring, but when they do occur, it's critical that we take it seriously, as the gentleman said, and also that we learn from them. In 2015, criminal elements attacked the IRS and its Get Transcript application, the tool that allows taxpayers to obtain copies of prior tax returns using a collection of personal information. An organized crime syndicate assessed this application using stolen personal information of individuals and obtained tax data for a staggering 300,000 individuals. Is that correct, Mr. Corbin?
That is correct, Congresswoman.
And since that incident, the IRS has been working diligently to increase the security of its systems. In January 2016, a result of cybersecurity improvements, the IRS stopped an attempt to acquire the e-filing PIN number of taxpayers. Mr. Corbin and Mrs. Garza, is that correct? And can you describe what the improvements were that were able for you to stop this other attempt?
So Congresswoman, for Get Transcripts, we took that application down and did an assessment level of risk, and we put in place what we call secure access authentication. It is a higher level of authentication that requires ID proofing, financial verification, and then an activation code in order to be able to get access to your transcript. We continue to take the dollars that were provided by Congress, the $290 million, to invest in additional cyber tools that allowed us, in this case, to be able to detect when there was activity occurring on tools that we have that are outside the IRS network. For the e-file PIN, Congresswoman, we looked at that and again identified that that would be a vulnerability. The e-file PIN application is not back up. We eliminated the e-file PIN application and now require AGI or the self-select PIN, which taxpayers have.
Okay, after the 2015 incident, you did a reassessment of the security of all of your online applications, including the data retrieval tool. And as you stated in your testimony, that assessment, and I'm quoting from your testimony, indicated the need for strengthened procedures and led to collaboration with the Board of Education to best implement those procedures. Now, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, now I want to turn to the 2017 data retrieval tool incident, where criminals were able to use personal information gathered elsewhere to create student aid accounts on the Department of Education's websites and obtain individuals' sensitive tax information. So Mr. Corbin and I'd say Mrs. Garza, is it right to say that much like in 2015, individuals were seeking the information necessary to file fraudulent returns?
That's correct.
Yet this time, individuals were much less successful in obtaining the returns. And according, would you like to comment on that? Yeah.
No, Congressman, go ahead.
According to GAO, identity theft at the IRS has decreased in recent years because the IRS has improved its ability to detect fraud before processing the return. This approval detection ability is illustrated by the fact that automatic security filters were able to stop almost 65% of potentially fraudulent refunds from being issued in the data retrieval tool incident. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So we can't stop all cyber attacks. That's just the reality of today, but we can learn from them. So I think you've shown your ability to do that. So, you know, when you file, why would somebody want to file a fraudulent return? What was the purpose of it for the purpose?
So, Congresswoman, most people file fraudulent returns with the hopes of obtaining a refund from that return.
And are they successful?
Congresswoman, fraudsters are successful, but we have gotten so much better over the years. The IRS has a public-private partnership called the Security Summit, where we work to protect the tax ecosystem, working with state departments of revenue, with software developers, so that we can build better systems to help protect the tax ecosystem. As you stated in this case with the data retrieval tool, we have new data elements or information that we are using in our filters. It did allow us to stop 80% of the returns that were filed in this event that were either potentially fraudulent or before the refunds were able to be paid.
Well, thank you. My time has expired, but I hope we can continue to fund the IT improvements that the IRS requests so we can continue going forward and being more effective in stopping fraud and helping taxpayers. Thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you, Ms. Maloney. Mr. Grothman, you're the one we've been looking for. The last one.
Go ahead.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Gray, I'll give you a few questions. How long have you been the Chief Information Officer over at Education?
11 months, sir.
Okay. And since November of 2015, this committee has uncovered what we feel are significant shortcomings in your IT security plans, before you were even there, as well as corruption of the former CIO. As newcomer, what concerns you the most? And what were your first actions as CIO to clean this up?
There were several. I have 5 focus areas when I came to the department. One was on security, another was FATARA, and organizational health. So there were policy challenges. There was numerous things that we need to improve. And I will say in the last 11 months, We have made significant progress at the department in terms of implementing processes, implementing policies, changing personnel.
Okay. Last year, USERT reported 192 incidents in your department. Can you tell us what information leaked out in those 192? Give us, say, how many files and what they covered?
I would have to get that information for you, sir. I do have a list of the information, and but I want to verify.
Give me a broad, there must be some that stick in your mind. What are the type of things that get out there?
Typically, Social Security numbers that were inadvertently sent from one individual to an individual it wasn't supposed to, or it wasn't encrypted.
Anything beyond that? Any information connected with the Social Security numbers?
I don't want to. I want to verify, sir. But to my knowledge,
you can't even think of any example.
Not at this moment.
Okay. Is this? I guess we'll call this the OCIO 14 handbook.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You know how recently this was updated? Or I've got one that I believe is right now the current one that you must give your employees. You know how recently it was, or how recent the most recent update was?
There is a draft circling right now that is being updated, that has been updated, and it is being routed for concurrence right now.
Yeah, but you know how old this is?
Several years, sir.
Yeah.
Too many.
A little over 6 years now. Okay. Do you think that's satisfactory?
No, sir.
Okay. Could you give us a hard number as to when you feel you've got something new available for your new employees?
For OCIO 14?
Correct.
The concurrence process within the department takes an amount of time, so I can't comment on that, but I will say that I have a solid draft that is going through concurrence right now.
Can you give us a guess? A month, 4 months, a year?
My understanding is the process is about 6 months to a year to go through formal concurrence.
And how far are you through the process now?
We started last week. We started the actual concurrence process last week, sir.
Okay, so you began something, but it could be a year before we get something that's more than 6 years old.
I will expedite it because I know it's critical to the department.
And it's critical to us and critical for the public. Could you give us some, when we talk about the files with the Social Security number, can you tell us what else is in those files?
I would have to look specifically at them. At this point, sometimes there are Excel spreadsheets that contain Social Security numbers. I would have to look to verify.
Okay. We'll try Mr. Runcie. Have there been breaches of your?
Not to my knowledge. No, there was, I think about, might have been 4 years ago, there was a time where the system was open for a few minutes and there were 6,000 cases of information that was viewed that shouldn't have been viewed, but that was the only systemic breach or exfiltration of, it wasn't even exfiltration, but it was an incident that occurred at that time.
And how long ago was that? How long ago was that?
It was a few years ago. I'm not exactly sure.
So you've had nobody breach anything for the last 4 or 5 years? You think 3, 4 years, we'll say?
Well, there's been no material breach. There's a possibility that there might have been an incident here or incident there in terms of student aid data, but none to my knowledge.
Okay. They don't tell you?
I would be informed if there was, and I'm not aware of any.
Okay. I'll yield the remainder of my time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm ready to close. We'll have none of my colleagues on the Democrat side, so I will make some very brief comments. I will, to not broach our protocol, I will not ask questions, but I will let Ms. Garza, Mr. Corbin, Mr. Camus know that we will be asking you exactly how many fraudulent returns were filed as a result of the breach and when those people obtained that information. And we will want an answer in what most of us would consider reasonable time. It has been extraordinarily difficult today to get any kind of specific answer out of any of you. And I think Mr. Mitchell's comments about the scarecrow were entirely apt. You're blaming each other. The American people, frankly, are tired of this kind of display of incompetence again. You all cannot answer questions or will not answer questions. It's a little difficult to know. And let me tell you something. In my world, $30 million is a lot of money. A lot of money. And you all don't seem to take it seriously at all. That as a result of your not being able to take action, when a breach is made and you're not following the law to let Congress know, it's even more troubling to me that you take so long to do anything. Mr. Grothman's comments about a document that's very important taking 7 years to update, it's pure incompetence. And I would venture to say that we might be able to get better people coming into your agencies to do the work that needs to be done, regardless of the pay, if they thought they could get something done. But the bureaucracies are so impossible to change. And I do want to note that both Mr. Gray and Mr. Runcie came to the department, and all of you all too, in the IRS, under the Obama administration. Our colleagues are going to raise Cain with the existing departments and make it appear as though this is the responsibility of the current administration. And I think it needs to be made abundantly clear that you all came into these agencies under the previous administration and have been kept on by the previous administration. We will also put into the record the expanded timeline in terms of when these problems began occurring, and point out where we possibly can the inaction of the people who are supposed to be working for the American people and keeping their data confidential. So I thank you all for being here today, and this hearing is dismissed.